Hello and welcome to a new video. If you are one of the few people that have watched my last video about the forge in the townland of Kappa near Inistioge in Kilkenny, you will have heard that I mentioned that I used the old Ordnance Survey maps provided by the National Library of Scotland, and I said at the time in the video that if you're interested in learning how I used them, leave a comment in the comment section, which nobody did, but I'm still gonna do it anyway, because I think it could be useful for quite a few people. I've talked to people who work in conservation and in heritage and in archaeology, and none of them knew about this resource, which is fairly new. But I think word needs to spread that this resource is out there and that it is free and open data, which is hard to compete with. And for example, the Historic Environment Viewer for Ireland cannot compete with that because their Ordnance Survey maps are still under copyright and not open data. I mean, every work is copyrighted unless it's in the public domain, but it is much easier to use the maps on the National Library of Scotland website, and we are also using them as background layers when we're mapping on OpenStreetMap, which is really useful when you're mapping historical features, obviously, like archaeological sites, or let's say we got an inquiry recently about watermills in County Cork. If you want to look at those, you can add them from those sources onto OpenStreetMap, no problem at all, because it is open data, whereas you can't copy anything that you find on the Historic Environment Viewer, really, because they use Táilte Éireann maps as a background layer, which used to be Ordnance Survey Ireland, and for some reason they can still claim copyright on those, whereas the National Library of Scotland does not. I don't know if that is just ignorance or if there's different laws in place in the UK and in Ireland. I have my doubts about the latter. So let's use the forge that I mentioned in the last video, even if you haven't watched it, as an example. This is in County Kilkenny. There are several ways of getting to these maps. I used to use the side-by-side viewer first, which I will talk about later on, but I think the easiest to use maybe is the map finder, which is the one here in the top center, and it shows you the outline of maps that are available for the region. You can already see that in the thumbnail there, if it is small enough for a thumbnail, preview, whatever. So you see the dark red lines, those are the outlines of the sheets of Ordnance Survey maps, and those did not change from the first to the third edition, which is what is required when you're doing any conservation archaeology, buildings archaeology. Those are usually the sources that are required in your assessment, as far as I know. And so the details on the map will change, but the outline is the same for the 6-inch. And then there's also 1-inch, which will obviously have fewer details on it. But there are several editions of the 1-inch and several editions of the 6-inch. And then you have the 25-inch as well, which is not included here for Ireland. Possibly, I'm thinking maybe, no, it wasn't made before. It was made before the independence, so it should be, but maybe they just decided not to scan them. I don't know. But it's very good to have the resource for Ireland, and the reason is that Ireland was still not independent, so Ordnance Survey, the British Ordnance Survey, covered Ireland as well, and famously they started their survey in Ireland for a practice run, and that's why we have all this data available, even though the National Library of Scotland scanned it. So hooray for that. Anyways, we'll go into that one and I'll explain how you find your location. So as the background layer, the default background layer is the Esri World Topo, and at the bottom right you get copyright information. The tiles are by ArcGIS, and the overlay, which is the red stuff, is by the National Library of Scotland. And this is how this should be done. If you use someone's copyrighted map, you state that, and if you have an overlay, you state that separately. Just pointing that out because even Irish government agencies haven't figured that out. You can change that to, for example, if you're an OpenStreetMap fan or user, you can change that, for example, to OpenStreetMap, which is what I'm going to do. And that is useful because it has a lot more details, like waterways, for example, and a lot more place names, of course, because, you know, like townlands and things like that, which you might be familiar with in Ireland and they are useful for orientation. So you could just zoom in on the area and find whatever you're looking for that way, if you're good at map reading and finding a way just by doing that. You can also use the search, which is on the left-hand side. And you have to be aware that there is a search for the UK and a search for world, which does include Ireland. The maps itself, as I mentioned, are included for Ireland because it was still part of the UK at the time. Now it's not. But what we're searching for now is the modern place name and the modern political setup. So you have to switch to world for a start. Then you can type in a place name. Be aware that it will likely not find townland names. I have tried it before and it didn't work, so I'm not doing that. Below that it says you can use the national grid reference. I presume this is the British national grid, of course Ireland has its own. And then latitude and longitude, or the postcode. This does, of course, not include air code because that is not open data. So it won't work. I'll prove that to you. I'll put in the air code of somewhere I have been to. It's in Kilkenny. R95 is usually Kilkenny, and then W66V is somewhere I know in Kilkenny. It's not where I live. Don't get your hopes up. Don't dox me. And if I hit submit, it searches and it finds nothing. Okay, so the air code won't work because that is not open data. That is a topic for a different video. But what does work is the latitude and longitude. So if you don't know by heart, because it's a lot of digits, I wouldn't expect anyone to know that. You can go to Google Maps if you want to. Obviously, I'm not going to do that because, you know, they're the enemy. And I'm just going to zoom in using OpenStreetMap. So the forge is here, was here, this building here. And if you want to get the coordinates, you just right click with your mouse, or if you're using a phone, hold your finger on the screen, and then the menu pops up and you click on show address. And then it shows the coordinates on the top left in the search bar and also underneath as a link. So you can just copy either from the search bar or from here. It's probably easier from the search bar. Just copy that. So either with the menu or Control C. And then you go back into the Scottish maps and you paste that in where it says national grid reference, latitude, longitude, or postcode. And you hit submit. And that'll bring you to that as well. It will not mark the location, but it will be, I guess, roughly in the center of the screen. You can also move all these windows around using the four-sided arrow there. This one, you can also close it if it's in your way. You can also close that one or move that around, or close it. And there's also a slider here where you can limit the time frame. I won't do that. It starts in 1820, which is a bit early. The first surveys were in the 1830s in Ireland, and the last ones you won't get because Ireland had its independence by then. Down here you can also change the transparency of boxes. By boxes they mean the outline of the old Ordnance Survey map, so if I move that around you can see how that changes the transparency. In this view you also get down here, you get a scale which can be useful, and a print button and a zoom in and zoom out thing. Down here on the right you see the copyright information, so it's OpenStreetMap contributors because the background layer is OpenStreetMap and the overlay is National Library of Scotland. The same, what I said before, applies. You have to attribute everyone whose data you use. So if I wanted to know what maps are available for this forge, I can zoom in a little bit more. It doesn't really matter because it's all on this sheet. Maybe I better zoom out. So you see the outline of the sheet is here. So you have Inistioge on that, Mount Alto, and west of there. You just kind of have to remember where on the sheet your object is that you're interested in. So then you just click, regular click, left click on your mouse on this sheet, and I've put this in the way now, so I'll move it away. And that'll highlight this sheet here in blue, And on the right hand side, it'll show you which sheets are available for this area. It is set on the left hand side of the thing that I just moved. It has chosen OS for Ordnance Survey 6-inch 1820s to 1960s. So it's only going to show you 6-inch maps. And you can see here the area is Great Britain Ordnance Survey, you know, because at the time that was still not the 1960s, but starting in the 1820s, this was still Great Britain. So I'm probably confusing Great Britain and UK, sorry. Apologies. On the right hand side then, you get the two sheets. So you see Kilkenny, sheet 32. So they surveyed them by county. So the first word you see, the first name is the county, and then it's the sheet 32 for County Kilkenny, which is important to reference for certain things. This is also the number, by the way. If you're looking sites up on the Historic Environment Viewer, the red dots, so to speak, the Sites and Monuments records, it starts with the county, 2 letters, KK for Kilkenny, and then the 32, there might be a 0 before that, I don't know. The 32 for the sheet number, and then there's a monument number after that, but it always starts with the county and the Ordnance Survey sheet from the 6-inch map, in case you didn't know. So you can click on that then. I would recommend that you right click and open a new tab. And that will open only that sheet. Okay, and then you can zoom in on your area. That's why I said try to remember where roughly on the sheet it was. So this is the townland boundary I talked about in the previous video, which is also partly the same as the stream. And the smithy or the forge is just to the right or the east of the number 42. The 42, I presume, is the height above sea level in feet. So there's another building here, which I also mentioned in the previous video, which is no longer there. And this farm here is still there. And a spring or a well is marked here. That's the little circle. So if you are doing research into this forge, you can tell it wasn't there. So this was surveyed in 1839 and printed in 1842. Important information. So you can tell it wasn't there in 1839 because it's not on the map. If you want to go to the next one then, there's quite a big gap. Unfortunately, I wished I had done a survey in between. See, it says still surveyed 1839, revised in 1901. So that's 62 years, right? That's quite a long time to be not surveying. And then it was published in 1903. So if I open that up in a new tab and zoom in, you see that it does have the smithy marked there. So the left hand side of the building is the forge, at the right hand side is the residence, and then the little shed behind. What the current resident told me was the woodworking shop. So it is there. So you can tell that at some time between 1839 and 1901, the forge was built. The farm is still there, the well is still there, and all that. The house that was here is gone. I've already said that in the last video. So that is quite handy to know. For some areas, you also get the 3rd edition. Let's go to, not to make it too obvious, but I'm doing a course in buildings archaeology at the moment, and one of our assignments is a church in County Sligo. So this is the church. Right click, show address, get the coordinates, and show them in here, submit. Again, recommend zooming out to orient yourself which sheet it's on. You see there's a bit of an overlap here, whereas in Kilkenny we only had the one line. There's a few overlapping lines here. So it's in the, where's it gone? Kind of top left corner, right? For some reason I still only, oh no, I have to click on it. Clear. I have to click on the sheet. And you can see here that there's a lot more, which is partly because this townland is very close to County Leitrim. So you get suggestions for Leitrim as well, but you also get Sligo. And again, I only get the two editions. I don't know why. Sometimes you do get 3. I don't know what that depends on, to be honest. Maybe something interesting to show is, so this, I'm opening the first edition for Sligo. Top left corner, there's the church. Okay. It has kind of like an east-southeasterly orientation. And there's a minor road going here from the west-southwest to east-northeast. Jesus, very difficult. And then if I open the second edition, Sligo. So see, this was revised in 1910. I think they usually started in the east, probably in Dublin, and then worked their way west. That's why the date is usually later, even though here they started earlier than in Kilkenny with the first edition. I don't know. I don't know the whole history of Ordnance Survey. Wouldn't be sitting here if I did. If I open that up and zoom in on the same area, you can see that the orientation has changed of the church and even the size. But I think that is just a mistake that probably the first generation surveyors made. I don't think they demolished it and rebuilt it. It is actually marked here not as a ruin because it's not hollow. But it is hollow here, if you know what I mean, so that means it's a ruin. Also, it says in ruins, whereas here it doesn't say in ruins. So that's just something you have to be aware of, that the shape and size of monuments can change between the first and the second edition, which does not necessarily mean that they actually changed size and shape physically. So this is how you use the map finder. You can also use, I'll go back to my forge. And up at the top you see there's also georeferenced maps and side-by-side. The side-by-side is also quite useful. If you click on that, it should stay in the same area that you've looked up before, which is quite handy. It does. So on the left-hand side now we have the 6-inch second edition. You kind of have to know that, I won't tell you. Selected map series on the left is Ordnance Survey 6-inch 1888 to 1915. So that's when they did the second edition. And on the right you have Esri World Imagery, which has a different name on the historic environment viewer, but just have to deal with that. You could make both of them into Ordnance Survey maps. So for example here, again you have to be aware that at the time it was Great Britain, so you have to choose that. And here it chooses for some reason the 1-inch first series. So you have to open that up and go to this one. And there is a way to swap them also in the center. Because if you want to use chronological reading direction, you want to have the older one on the left and the newer one on the right. Completely up to you, of course. Again, you can see that the orientation of the church is changing between the first and the second edition. It's just one of those curiosities. So that gives you the opportunity to compare the same site even easier. Like for example, you can zoom in, and if you have ever used the HEV, the Historic Environment Viewer, you'll see how much better the quality is here, how much more you can zoom in. So you can see that some of this building is here. The furthest south on the farm is here, and it's gone on the second edition, for example. And the orientation of buildings does change, but that doesn't necessarily mean they changed in real life, as I said. This farm also seems to have gotten a couple more buildings, for example. What you could also see sometimes, for example, I'm bringing up watermills again because we had the inquiry yesterday. Sometimes they're always watermills because they're using the power of water, but the product might be a different one, or the produce. So it might be a woolen mills in the first edition, and a corn mill in the second edition, because there weren't as many woolen mills by the time of the second edition. Can't go into that now. I might do a video about mills at some point. But that is very useful, and when you move your mouse cursor on the left hand side or on the right hand side, it'll also follow it fairly closely in the other map. So that's useful. For some people it might be useful to compare with the satellite imagery as well. I don't know, I don't have any use for that at the moment, but I'm sure there are people out there who want that. So you would have to change to Esri OSM LiDAR. So there's also LiDAR data, probably not for Ireland, I haven't tried it. But there's also allegedly Google Satellite, yes, and other ones. You just have to be careful with the copyright there. So I'm going back to that. We could also try, there's different first inch. You can see it's a lot blurrier because it's 1 inch to the mile. So the scale is different, so there's going to be different details on it and different focus. This one I think was focusing on hills, as you might be able to see. It's all nicely shaded, and so this one is different again. It's again the 1 inch map, but you have the smithy on that one as well, the forge and the church. So it might not, in the first edition you have the full name of the church, and on the 1 inch it'll only say church because there wasn't enough space to put the full name for every church on it. Like Shankill Church, it does have the full name even though it's only a site of a church. But that'll give you a lot of resources to research historical buildings or sites and stuff like that. If I go back to the geo-referenced maps, which I haven't been on that, you will see the copyright license as well. I don't know why they didn't put that on all of them. Maybe it's because on the side-by-side and the map finder you get different sources of maps, whereas here it's only the scans, I think. Yeah, it's only the scans by the National Monument Service, so they hold the copyright, but it is open data, so it's CC-BY. You can click on that as well, and that'll explain it can be used for commercial, non-commercial, educational, and private use of those map images. Only the ones that have this CC-BY. And it says here, CC-BY, you are welcome to use some images displayed on the Map Images website for commercial, non-commercial, educational, and private purposes under the terms of the Creative Commons Attribution License. Use is conditional on provision of attribution. Please apply the credit line reproduced with the permission of the National Library of Scotland wherever you reuse map images. If you create derivative work, the documentation of your work must contain this attribution. This is what I said earlier. If you're using this as your background layer, you have to use this line reproduced with the permission of the National Library of Scotland and the CC-BY. And then if you put your own layer on it, you can claim copyright for your own layer, but you cannot claim copyright for what's underneath, for what you got from the National Library of Scotland, okay? So there's more links that you can read up on. I'm only giving a very brief introduction into this. So if you're using this in a paper or wherever in a PowerPoint, very few people do this, put their sources on the images and the maps they use, unfortunately, even though they should, obviously, because people might be watching the lecture or read the paper and they'd want to know, where did they get this map from? It's a courtesy to whoever made the map and also whoever is the original copyright owner. And it's just what should be done, really. You wouldn't want your own stuff used without being given credit for it. So I hope that was interesting, helpful, and will help you in your research or in your studies. And let me know in the comments what you thought, or not. I mean, it's a free country still. And if you think you know someone who might benefit from it, please share, obviously. And I shall see you in another video again soon. Slán go fóill.